January 24th, 2026. The Detroit Red Wings were in first place in the Atlantic Division, not just in the playoff picture. Not just hanging around a wild card spot. First place. There was genuine conversation, real, serious conversation, about whether this team could compete for the top seed in the entire Eastern Conference. And then March happened, and then April happened. And then, on a Saturday night in New Jersey, on Fan Appreciation Night of all nights, the Red Wings were eliminated from playoff contention. 10 straight seasons. No postseason hockey. But here's the question nobody has been able to fully answer until now. Why does this keep happening? Every year, the same story. The Red Wings look competitive in the fall. They look legitimate in December and January. They're in the conversation heading into February, and then somewhere around the Olympic break, somewhere around late February, somewhere in the brutal grind of March, the whole thing falls apart. Today, we're breaking down exactly what happened in 2025-26. We're going to look at the metric that might finally explain the pattern, and we're going to talk honestly about what Detroit needs to do to make sure this doesn't happen again. The rise, how good they looked. Let's start with how genuinely good the Detroit Red Wings looked for the first 4.5 months of the season. On January 24, the Red Wings were 3-2-1-6-5. That record put them in first place in the Atlantic Division, and there was even talk of the Wings competing for the top seed in the Eastern Conference. Think about that for a moment. This was not a team sneaking into a wild card spot. This was a team that was by the standings the best team in one of the toughest divisions in hockey. They had 2 point-per-game players in Alex DeBrincat, 83 points in 80 games, and Lucas Raymond, who was closing in on that pace with 76 points in 78 games. Their goaltending was holding up. Their power play was functional. Their defensive structure, especially in the first half, was doing enough to keep them competitive every single night. Defenseman Ben Kierode put it plainly in his end-of-season reflection. For about 65 games, there wasn't a second I didn't think this team was going to be a playoff team. 65 games. This wasn't a short-lived feeling. This was a team that genuinely believed for most of the season that their playoff drought was finally ending. And then came the Olympic break. The collapse. What actually happened? The warning signs in hindsight were already there before the Olympic break even arrived. The Red Wings limped into the Olympics, dropping 4 of 5 games. At the time, it didn't seem like a major concern. The consensus was that the break would allow the Wings to come back strong in the second half. Well, a disappointing March, followed by losing 6 of their last 7 games, pretty much ended any hopes Detroit had of ending their decade-long playoff drought. Detroit's 561 points percentage was a 7% improvement over last season, but they ultimately missed the playoffs by 8 points after sitting atop the Atlantic Division as late as January 25. The Red Wings had several opportunities to bank more points throughout the season and failed to do so, including 4 instances where they led late, gave up a tying goal with under a minute to play, and lost in overtime or regulation 4 times. 4 games where they had the lead with under 60 seconds to go, and didn't close it out. That's not bad luck. That's a pattern. That's a team that doesn't have the compete level, the desperation, or the physical presence to hold a lead when the other team is throwing everything they have at the net. And Detroit was knocked out when they lost to the New Jersey Devils 5-3 on Fan Appreciation Night, making it 10 straight seasons without playoff hockey in Motown. 10 straight years. A franchise that was defined for decades by winning now has the longest active playoff drought in the entire NHL. The metric, the aggression index. So why does this keep happening? People have pointed to the goaltending. People have pointed to the lack of depth scoring. People have pointed to coaching decisions, trade deadline moves that didn't work out, a compressed schedule due to the Olympics. All of those factors are real. But there might be a deeper, more structural answer, one that shows up not in goals or assists or save percentages, but in a completely different kind of number. A study published by Casino Guru looked at what they called the NHL's aggression index, an aggregate of individual statistics including hits, major penalties, fights, penalty minutes, and suspensions, weighted and built into a composite score out of 100. The idea behind it is straightforward. How physical, how hard, how aggressive does a team actually play? The Red Wings landed dead last in the entire league. Detroit accrued a score of just 6.8 out of 100. In contrast, the top-ranked team, the Tampa Bay Lightning, racked up a score of 87.89, 6.8 out of 100, dead last in the NHL. And here's where it gets really interesting and really uncomfortable for Detroit fans. 6 Atlantic Division teams ranked in the top 10 of the aggression index. Tampa Bay, Boston, Montreal, Florida, Buffalo, and Ottawa. 6 of the 8 teams in Detroit's own division play a significantly more physical game than the Red Wings. When the Red Wings face any of those teams in a tight, meaningful playoff race game in March, when the hockey gets harder, when the battles are longer, when the physical toll of every shift compounds over an 8-2 game season, they are, statistically, the least equipped team in the league to handle that environment. Why aggression matters more in March. Now, some of you are already thinking, hold on, does this really matter? Hockey is about skill, about systems, about execution, not about being the most physical team. And you're not wrong that skill matters. But the aggression index isn't just measuring how many fights a team gets into, it's measuring something harder to quantify: intensity. Early in the season, teams play a more open, flowing style of hockey. The pace is high, the systems are being established, and the games, while important, don't carry the full psychological weight of a February or March contest where every point is the difference between your season continuing or ending. But once the second half begins, teams consistently ramp up the tough love, especially those vying for a playoff spot. And coincidentally, that's exactly when the Red Wings begin to fade. This isn't about the Red Wings being soft. It's not about individual toughness. It's about a roster that was built to play a skill-based, flow-based game, and that same roster struggling when the league collectively decides to make hockey harder, more physical, and more desperate. Goaltender John Gibson was going 2-4-1 with a 3.74 goals against average and 876 save percentage in his last 7 appearances late in the season. James Van Riemsdyk was in a 1-6 game goal drought down the stretch, logging just 4 assists in that span. When the physical game ramps up and the team around the goaltender can't protect him the way playoff caliber teams do when the battles in front of the net are lost. When the board work goes against you, when the slot is wide open shift after shift, this is what happens. The numbers fall off. The leads don't hold. The March collapse arrives right on schedule. The team's doing it right. So what does doing it right actually look like? Look at the Carolina Hurricanes. The Hurricanes ranked 16th in the aggression index, not in the top 10. Not considered an especially physical team by the raw numbers. But fans who watched them in the playoffs wouldn't have believed that rating. They played a strong, physical game without any of the shenanigans that Tampa or Florida typically pull off. That's the key. The Hurricanes don't rack up fight majors or suspension-worthy hits. They don't play dirty, but they play hard every shift, every period, every game, deep into the season, and even deeper into the playoffs. They build that intensity gradually. They peak at the right moment. And when the playoffs come, they're the team every opponent least wants to face. The Vegas Golden Knights do the same thing. They hold back early in the year, they don't exhaust themselves chasing regular season points, and then they dial it up when it matters. By the time April arrives, they are at their most dangerous. That is not what the Red Wings look like in April. That is the exact opposite of what the Red Wings look like in April. Detroit struggled to score at 5-on-5, lacked a team identity and culture, and lacked the internal leadership necessary to right the ship as they were slipping down the standings. A team that doesn't have that internal drive, that hunger that pulls everyone together when the season is slipping away, is a team that finds new ways to lose in the last month of the year. And for 4 straight seasons, that has been the Detroit Red Wings. The deeper problem, culture and identity. Here's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of the statistics. Detroit had 2 point-per-game players and still wasn't good enough to win against legitimate up-and-coming teams like the Ottawa Senators or Montreal Canadiens, or to beat proven winners like the Tampa Bay Lightning. Their offense completely fell off down the stretch. They coughed up leads late. They left points on the table repeatedly, and the collapse overshadowed any gains made in the first half of the year. This is a roster that plays well when the game allows them to play well. When there's space, when the puck moves, when everything flows the way it's designed to. But hockey, real hockey, March hockey, playoff intensity hockey doesn't always allow you to play your game. Sometimes the other team takes that away from you. Sometimes the games get tight and ugly and grinding. Sometimes the only way to win is to outwork the team across from you in ways that don't show up in the box score. And when that happens to Detroit, when the game gets taken away from them, they don't have an answer. They don't have the physical presence to reclaim it, they don't have the defensive structure to withstand it, and they don't appear to have the internal leadership to rally around when it's slipping away. For the 4th consecutive year, another subpar March. A difficulty earning desperately needed points for the standings, and the inevitable crash down the standings. 4 years in a row. The same pattern, the same result. What needs to change? So what's the answer? The good news and there's good news, is that the solution isn't complicated to identify. It's just hard to execute. To avoid a repeat in 2026-27 and finally get over the hump, the Red Wings need to complete their top 6, infuse more talent in the bottom 6, and remove or replace ineffective players that either can't keep up with today's game or provide no leadership value. The bottom 6 matters more than most people think, because when the game gets physical, when March arrives and the hockey gets harder, it's the fourth-line center winning faceoffs, the grinding winger finishing checks, the defensive forward killing penalties who make the top players' lives easier. Detroit's bottom 6, by almost every account, was not doing that job this season. And then there's the trade deadline. Despite the success of deadline edition Justin Falk over the last few games, it wasn't enough to put Detroit into the 2026 Stanley Cup playoffs. One defenseman added in late March doesn't change a team's physical identity. That kind of change has to be built into the roster from the start of training camp, not patched in when the collapse is already happening. Perhaps taking a page out of Carolina's book could make sense, keeping things cool early in the season and then dialing it up later in the year. That could be the recipe to avoid another March collapse. And the good news is the 2026-27 schedule won't be as compressed as this past season's was. The Olympic break squeezed games together in a way that taxed tired teams even further. A more normal schedule gives Detroit a real chance to manage minutes better, peak at the right time, and avoid the physical burnout that set in during the second half. January 24, 2026. First place in the Atlantic Division, April 12, 2026. Eliminated from playoff contention. 10 straight years without the playoffs. That is the story of the 2025-26 Detroit Red Wings. And it is the same story, told with different names and different games and different dates, for the 4th consecutive year. The aggression index isn't just a number, it's a mirror. A reflection of a team that plays beautiful hockey when the game is on its terms and struggles to compete when the game gets taken away from them. Dead last in the NHL. 6.8 out of 100. In the same division as 6 of the 10 most aggressive teams in the entire league. That's not a coincidence. That's not bad luck. That's a structural problem, a roster that needs to be harder to play against. A culture that needs to be hungry in March the way it is in October, and a leadership group that needs to pull the room together when the points stop coming and the losses pile up. Steve Yzerman built teams that knew how to win when it was hard. The Red Wings' next chapter needs that same DNA, because the skill is already there. DeBrincat and Raymond can score with anyone. The young core is developing. The pieces are real. But the March collapse will keep coming back, until Detroit decides to play a game that doesn't require the season to go perfectly to keep them in the fight. The metric is clear. The solution is clear. Now someone in Detroit just has to be willing to act on it.